Kaida had always been drawn to the stories of old, the legends that spoke of brave heroes, powerful creatures, and ancient magic. Her village, though small and unremarkable, was rich with tales passed down through generations. Of all the legends, it was the tale of the phoenix that fascinated her most. The phoenix, a magnificent bird of flame, was said to rise from its own ashes every 1,000 years, bringing light and warmth to the world. It was a symbol of renewal, hope, and the eternal cycle of life. But in Kaida's time, the phoenix had not returned as expected. The world had begun to change. The skies were darker, the winds colder, and the once vibrant colors of the land were slowly being drained away. Farmers struggled with failing crops, and the animals that roamed the forest seemed more restless, as if sensing the coming of something terrible. The village elders spoke in hushed tones of a growing shadow, and many believed that the phoenix's failure to rise again was a sign of doom. Kaida's life, however, was routine. She helped her father in their small shop, mending clothes and selling trinkets to the villagers. She had no magical powers, no extraordinary skills, just an ordinary girl living an ordinary life. But something deep within her had always felt out of place, as if she were meant for something more. It was a feeling she couldn't explain, and one she often tried to ignore. That all changed one fateful evening. As Kaida sat by the hearth in her home, tending to the fire, she noticed something strange. The flames that had once danced brightly in the fireplace flickered and began to die, even though there was plenty of wood. She reached out to stir the embers, but instead of reigniting, the fire vanished entirely. A cold chill filled the room, and Kaida's heart sank. She glanced outside and saw that the darkness had thickened, swallowing the village in an eerie stillness. That night, Kaida had the most vivid dream of her life. In the dream, she stood on a barren plain, surrounded by swirling winds and ash. The world around her was bleak and lifeless, but in the distance, a faint light glimmered. She walked toward it, her steps slow and uncertain, until she came upon a figure cloaked in shadows. The figure held out its hand, and in its palm was a single glowing ember. "You are the last flame," the figure whispered, its voice like the rustling of dry leaves. "The phoenix has fallen, and with it, the light of the world fades. But you, Kaida, carry its last ember. You must reignite the fire, or all will be lost." When Kaida woke the next morning, she was drenched in sweat, her heart pounding in her chest. The dream had felt so real, as if the weight of the world had truly been placed on her shoulders. She tried to shake off the feeling, convincing herself it was just a dream, but as she went about her day, the sense of unease only grew stronger. The sun, normally bright and warm, was obscured by thick clouds, casting the village in a perpetual twilight. Later that day, the village elder, a wise man named Arlen, called for an emergency gathering in the village square. Kaida joined the crowd, her heart heavy with dread. Arlen's face was pale, and his voice trembled as he spoke. "The balance of our world is at risk," he began. "The phoenix, the guardian of light and fire, has not risen as it should. The darkness grows stronger, and soon it will consume everything. But there is hope. A flame still burns, a small, fragile ember that can reignite the phoenix's fire." Kaida's breath caught in her throat as Arlen's eyes locked onto hers. She wanted to look away, but something compelled her to meet his gaze. His His next words sent a shockwave through her entire being. "Kaida," he said softly, "you are the bearer of that flame." The crowd murmured in confusion, and Kaida felt a wave of disbelief wash over her. How could she, an ordinary girl, be connected to the Phoenix in any way? But before she could protest, Arlen stepped forward, placing a weathered hand on her shoulder. "The flame has been passed down through your bloodline for generations," Arlen explained. "It has been kept safe, hidden within you, waiting for the moment when it would be needed most. That moment is now. You must travel to the mountains of eternal flame, where the Phoenix once lived, and reignite its fire. Only then can the balance be restored." Kaida's mind raced. This couldn't be happening. She wasn't a hero, or a warrior, or anyone with the strength to save the world. She was just Kaida, a simple girl from a quiet village. But as she looked into Arlen's eyes, she saw a truth that she could not deny. The ember within her, she could feel it now, a warmth that pulsed in her chest, faint but undeniable. "I don't know how," she whispered, her voice trembling. Arlen gave her a reassuring smile. "You will find the way. The flame will guide you." And so, with little more than a cloak, a satchel of provisions, and the weight of the world on her shoulders, Kaida set out on her journey. Her destination, the mountains of eternal flame, a place spoken of only in legends. It was said to be a land of fire and ash, where the Phoenix had once made its nest. But it was also a place of great danger, where ancient forces, long dormant, awaited the return of the flame. As Kaida traveled, the world around her grew darker and colder. The once vibrant forests were now shrouded in mist, and the rivers had turned to sluggish, blackened streams. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and strange creatures lurked in the shadows, their eyes glowing with malevolent intent. On her third night, Kaida made camp by a dying stream. She stared into the meager fire she had managed to build, feeling the weight of loneliness pressing down on her. Doubt gnawed at her mind. What if she wasn't strong enough? What if she failed? As she gazed into the flickering flames, she thought of her village, her father, and the people she had left behind. She could almost hear their voices, filled with hope and fear, depending on her to save them. A fierce determination surged within her. She couldn't fail them. She wouldn't. The ember inside her pulsed with warmth, and for the first time, Kaida allowed herself to truly feel its power. It was a small flame, but it was alive, and as long as it burned within her, there was hope. The next leg of her journey was the most perilous yet. The path to the mountains of eternal flame was treacherous, filled with jagged cliffs and treacherous winds that howled like wolves. But Kaida pressed on, her steps steady, her heart resolved. Along the way, she encountered other travelers, lost souls who had been driven from their homes by the growing darkness. Some of them joined her for a time, offering their strength and companionship, but many could not continue, their spirits broken by the weight of the journey. At last, after weeks of travel, Kaida reached the base of the mountains. The air was thick with the scent of sulfur, and the ground was scorched black. The mountains of eternal flame loomed before her, their peaks lost in the clouds of ash that swirled above. Kaida's heart pounded as she began the ascent. The climb was steep, and the ground beneath her feet crumbled with every step. But she pressed on, driven by the ember that burned within her. She could feel the Phoenix's presence growing stronger, as if it were calling out remained were the ashes of its last rebirth, cold and lifeless. Kaida knelt before the altar, her hands trembling as she reached for the ember within her. It pulsed with warmth, and as she held it in her hands, she felt a connection to something far greater than herself. The phoenix's flame was not just a force of nature, it was life itself, the fire that burned within every living thing. And now, it was hers to protect. With a deep breath, Kaida placed the ember on the altar. At first, nothing happened. The silence was deafening, and for a moment, Kaida feared that she had failed. But then, slowly, the ember began to glow brighter. The air around her grew warmer, and the ground beneath her feet rumbled with power. Suddenly, the ashes on the altar erupted into flame, and from the fire, the phoenix rose once more, its wings spread wide, its body ablaze with golden light. It let out a cry that echoed across the mountains, a sound of pure, unbridled power. The darkness that had plagued the world began to recede, chased away by the phoenix's light. Kaida watched in awe as the phoenix soared into the sky, its flames lighting up the heavens. The world was saved, the balance restored. But as the phoenix disappeared into the distance, Kaida knew that her journey was not over. The flame within her still burned, and she would carry it with her always, a reminder of the power of hope and the strength that came from within.